We are heading to the weekend, but before we do that, join me, Rolene Marks, on the Israel Brief, brought to you by Lay of the Land, as I bring you your top stories from Israel right now, everybody. And just a reminder that you can check out our website on www.layoftheland.online. Our Facebook page is at Luttel Site. We bring you a message every Friday from a different part of the country. Check in with us tomorrow to see where in Israel we are. Give us a like, give us a follow, share your Shabbat message. We are on YouTube. Our channel is the Israel Brief. We are growing and we would love you to help us to increase our exposure by clicking on that red subscribe button. And of course, we're on Twitter at Lay of the Land 5. But let's take a look at those top stories. And yesterday we brought you the big story, which was the defection of one of the members of Israel's ruling coalition to the opposition, Edith Silman. Now, we don't have any major updates following yesterday, but we do know that Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met with members of his faction yesterday, called Yamina HaChadash, to try and put a stop to the defections. And we don't know exactly what was discussed in the meeting, but we do know that he came out and said the bleeding has stopped. One of the challenges moving ahead the next couple of weeks will be to try and prevent members of his party or members of other parties joining the coalition. Now, several members of Yamin HaChadash have spoken out and have given different opinions. We've had one opinion saying that, they have been offered everything by the Likud, but they don't see the Likud being able to put together a coalition, which is vital for a functioning government in Israel. We've had another saying that he's going to speak to Bennett and he's going to make demands that he feels the Prime Minister, who is also the party chair, should be meeting. And we have had another one saying that he really is committed to making this coalition work. So this is indicative of the robust democracy that Israel has. One party, many different opinions, and that's just the party we know about. Yesterday, Naftali Bennett, our Prime Minister and chair of Yamina Chadash, mentioned to the media that the opposition had literally harassed Edith Silman until she defected, and he gave no blame towards her for doing what she did. But the one thing that it has done is has plunged our government, our ruling coalition, into a chaotic period, something that we do not need as we navigate a very tense security situation at the moment. What is going to happen? It's anyone's guess. We do know that the next couple of weeks are critical, and the last thing that Israel needs is any more turmoil as we progress through Ramadan into Pesach and hopefully see things return to quiet. Not being too quiet today will be the United Nations General Assembly as they head to a vote to decide whether or not to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. This was a proposition brought up by the United States' ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who wants Russia suspended from the 47 body UN Human Rights Council, which is the chief agent with regards to human rights within the UN's institution. The move came following images coming out of the Ukrainian town of Bucha. We have all seen those visuals. They are absolutely distressing. And Greenfield Thomas went on to say that Russia's participation in the Human Rights Council is a farce, considering they have committed a war crime. Now, these are sentiments that have been echoed by Liz Truss, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, and United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And G7 states earlier today backed calls for Russia to be suspended from the UNHRC. So we'll bring you any updates that we have on the voting on your Israel Brief next week. The Jewish Agency have announced that through its fund for victims of terror, they will be assisting the widow of a Ukrainian foreign worker who was killed in the Bnei Brak terror attacks last week attend his funeral in Ukraine. The widow has flown to Moldova, where she will cross through the border crossing into Ukraine. Of course, it's great threat to her personal safety. Now, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, as well as Israel's National Insurance Fund, have assisted in helping to transport the bodies of the slain Ukrainian workers back to Ukraine for their burial. And our last story, we end this week on a slightly more positive note, and Israel is about to make space history again tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow our second ever astronaut to fly into space, Eitan Stibbe, heads off for a week to work on the International Space Station. Now, this is the first private project of its kind, and Stibbe is expected to participate or conduct 35 experiments while on board the International Space Station and stay there for a week. So we wish him Godspeed, Bahatzlacha. It reminds me of that Mel Brooks movie from History of the World, Jews in Space. But what an achievement, an incredible achievement for the state of Israel. And you can be sure that we will be following Stibbe on his adventures in space. Now, all that remains is for me to say this is the end of this week's edition of the Israel Brief. And before we head into the weekend, we wish you all a safe, a peaceful, and a healthy weekend. Shabbat Shalom, wherever you are. I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, and don't forget to join us next week for your top stories right here from Israel.